Well, for August, we're reading various short stories in the Bible to carry us through these summer months. And we have a little bit of a unique short story for this week. It's not really a story. We're going to look at the book of Habakkuk. And Habakkuk isn't a storyteller. He's a minor prophet. So we're going to hear some prophecy. You want to turn in your Bibles or on your phone to Habakkuk. It's an Old Testament minor prophet. If you have your Bibles, it's the clear white pages that you never turn to, because we hardly ever go to the minor prophets, do we? By the way, they're called minor prophets not because their message is less important. It's because their books are shorter. Okay, minor prophets mean shorter. Major prophets mean longer. Habakkuk is one of those minor prophets. And in his short book that he writes, it's really less of a story and more of a conversation that Habakkuk has with God. And it's a conversation that you and I still have with God. And so it's really helpful for us to listen in on his conversation and to learn from it for our own conversations. And for anyone here who is a parent, or for anyone here who has ever been a child, the format of this conversation will sound very familiar. Because my guess is some of you can tell me what a child's favorite question is. It's one word that you hear over and over again. A child loves to ask, why? Why? Exactly. Oh, when my kids were little, it just drove me crazy, doesn't it? I mean, when kids are little, they'll ask why about everything, right? Right? It's time to go to bed. Why? We're eating chicken for dinner tonight. Why? You need to put pants on before you leave the house. Why? It just goes on and on and on. You know, as they grow older, it doesn't stop. Those of you with teenagers know. There's still why, just with a little more attitude now, right? So you tell your teenager, hey, it's Saturday, you got to clean your room. Well, I don't have to clean my room. It's just going to get dirty again, right? Or you tell your teenager, hey, don't you have a test tomorrow? Shouldn't you be studying? Why should I study? I already know it all. Or, tomorrow we're going to go to Grandma's house for the day. Why do I have to go? Can't I just stay home? Right? The whys just keep coming. Again and again. And when my kids were little and they just kept coming, you try and answer because it's a wonderful way that they learn about the world and learn about life. But at some point, I just say to them, because I said so. Ever hear that from your parents? Because I said so. In other words, end of conversation. But you can kind of translate the because I said so as, look, trust me. Just trust me on this. Just trust me. Well, why continues to be our favorite question in our conversation with God, right? We look around the world and all that's going on in the world. I've got a whole bunch of why questions that I want to ask God. Why is it that we spend so many billions of dollars to build better bombs that can kill people, and we don't invest that in finding cures for diseases? Why, God? Why are some children born into families and communities that are starving and they starve to death, while other kids are born into communities where there's way too much food? Why do some people die young? And other people who are ready to go keep hanging on. Why, God? Why the wildfires, God? Why the earthquakes? Why the car accident? Why the heart attack? Why the cancer? And the list goes on and on, right? Why? Why, God? Please tell me, because it doesn't make any sense. It's the same conversation Habakkuk is going to have with God. We get to hear his whys that he starts with in Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Here's what he asks. He says, how long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There's strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in, the wicked surround the righteous, so that justice is perverted. Why, God, he says, if you are so good, if you are so powerful, if you could do something about all this, why do you allow so much badness in this world and in my life? Right, so Habakkuk, living hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right, in Jerusalem, he looks around the city of Jerusalem where he lives, and he sees that injustice and evil is just running rampant everywhere throughout the city. The poor are getting trampled on by the rich, so the poor keep getting poorer, and the rich just keep getting richer. The people who cheat and lie and steal, they're the ones who are succeeding in life, while those who are trying to do life right, who are trying to live good lives, keep getting, they just get put down. They keep losing. At night, it's not safe to walk the streets because there's violence everywhere. And you think, the court system, the police would do something about this, but they've been bought off by the rich, and so there's no justice anywhere. There's no hope to set things right again. And every day he watches, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And in frustration here, he says, God, why don't you do something? Why do you just keep on tolerating all of this evil that I see? He asks the question, and God answers him. This is pretty cool. Right? God gives him an answer, but it's not the answer that Habakkuk expects. He would expect, if God is going to follow the typical pattern with the prophets who call out to God, right? If God were to do what he usually does, he would tell Habakkuk, hey, you know what? There's a day coming when all wrongs will be made right again. Right? There's a day coming when justice is going to flow like a mighty river. There's a day coming when goodness will overcome all this. You just wait. That's kind of what he expects to hear. It's not how God answers. Read on, verses 5 through 11. This is God's answer to him. Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. And this is where he's expecting to hear, yeah, justice is coming. God's going to set everything right. And here's what God goes on to say. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless, impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly down like an eagle, swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind, and they gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all the fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and they capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind, and they go on. Guilty people whose own strength is their God. So here's God's answer to him. He says, don't worry, Habakkuk. Don't worry. I see all the wrong. I see all the evil. I see all the bad going on. And I'm going to do something about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, and they're going to come and crush you. They're going to destroy all of Jerusalem. Don't worry, I'm going to punch them. The Babylonians are his answer, right? What verse 6 tells us they're ruthless and impetuous. They're savage warriors who verse 7 tells us they're to be feared and dreaded. God is answering the evil in Jerusalem by bringing a greater evil in Babylon to come and crush them. And Habakkuk can't believe it. That's not at all what he expected to hear. Right? What in the world is God doing? So he asks more why. It's like a little kid, right? You get an answer and you ask more whys. Listen to verses 12 and 13. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? In other words, God, if you're good, why are you bringing even more evil? Why are you punishing your people who, yes, I know they're sick with evil. We can see that, right, God? Why are you punishing your people who are sick with evil with the people of Babylon who are terminally ill with evil? They are pure evil. Why are the wicked going to prosper again? Why is evil going to come and win again? Why, God? Why? 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 In fact, Habakkuk gets a little feisty at the start of chapter 2. Right? He stands there and demands an answer. He says, I will stand my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. He's kind of like a stubborn little kid, isn't he? Standing before God. So I'm not going to go anywhere until you tell me why. Because this makes no sense to me. And he knows he's crossed a line. And he has stood up to God in a way that he probably shouldn't have. And he deserves a timeout. He deserves to be sent to his room for this. That's not what God does. God's not angry with him. Instead, God patiently gives him an answer. Again, which is what the rest of chapter 2 is all about. I'm going to leave you to read chapter 2 on your own later on today. Right? In chapter 2, God says, don't worry, Haggai. Justice will win in the end. Okay? The Babylonians will get what they deserve. Right? In verses 6 through 8, he says to them, the plunderers who are coming, they will be plundered themselves. In 9 through 11, he says, the conquerors who are coming to conquer you, in the end, they will be conquered. 12 through 14, the builders who are coming, I will tear them down. Don't worry. 15 through 18, they're coming to abuse you. Don't worry, they will end up being abused. 19 through 20 says, yeah, I know they pray to idols. I know that. Don't worry, I will silence them. I will silence them. So he assures Habakkuk, don't worry, justice will prevail. Okay, he gives him that assurance, but notice what he doesn't do. He still doesn't answer why. He still doesn't give Habakkuk the answer to his why questions. God does not explain himself to Habakkuk. You see, I think the heart of God's answer, the heart of God's message in this book, comes in verse 4 of chapter 2. In that verse, he starts by pointing to the king of Babylon and says, see, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not right. In other words, he's saying, look, I know that the king of Babylon is evil. I know. I'm not ignorant about that. But, and now he points to Habakkuk and says, but the righteous person will live by faith. He's saying, Habakkuk, trust me. Just trust me. When you don't understand, and even if I wanted to, I couldn't explain this to you, Habakkuk, but even when you don't understand what's going on, trust me. And I think that's the message from this book to you and to me. In the middle of our lives, filled with all kinds of why questions, God says, trust me. Even when you don't find the answers that you wish you had. Live by faith, he says. A righteous person will live by his or her faith. So what does it mean for us to live by our faith? Well, we need to be reminded of what that faith is if we're going to live it out, right? And again, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 gives us a great definition of what faith really is, right? It tells us that faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see, of what we do not see, of what we cannot understand. Faith is trusting God even when you don't have all the answers, even when it looks like everything is out of control, even when it looks like things are falling apart. In faith, we say, I will trust you, God. In the midst of all my why questions, I will trust your because I said so. Because I said so. Right? If you were to read Hebrews 11, you'll read a whole list of people who trusted simply because God said so. They didn't get their why questions answered. God said to them, do this because I said so. You read about Noah who built an ark, not because he read the weather forecast and it called for rain. He built an ark on dry ground just because God said so. You'll read about Abraham who packed up, left his home behind, not because he knew he had purchased a better home in a different place. He didn't know where he was going. He did it simply because God said so. God didn't tell him why. You read about Isaac, who laid himself down on an altar to be sacrificed. Not because he understood why, not because he knew there was a ram nearby that God was going to save him at the last second. He didn't know. He laid on that altar because he trusted God's, because I said so. You read about Moses. Moses who went to confront Pharaoh to say, let my people go, not because he was certain that he could do this job. He wasn't. He went terrified, but he went because God said, because I said so, go do it. You read about Joshua, who marched around the walls of Jericho again and again and again, not because he was absolutely 100% certain that walking around the walls would knock them down. He did it because God said, do this because I said so. They didn't have the answers to their why questions, but they trusted God anyways. That's living in faith. That's exactly how you and I are called to live. How Habakkuk was invited to live, how you and I are called to live. Like Paul says about us in 2 Corinthians 5, he says, we live by faith, not by sight. I wish I could tell you that God will give you an answer to every why question that you have. But you know what? We won't get all those answers. But we do trust the one who does have all the answers. We trust God, his goodness, his wisdom, his love. We trust his plan that we can't comprehend, even if he tried to tell us. We trust in his promises, even when we don't see them. We move forward in life satisfied with God's because I said so. That's enough, because I said so. So for Habakkuk, we read the rest of the story here. That was enough. That was enough for him. To know that God is going to work out his plan, that's enough. He still doesn't have the answers to his why questions. He still doesn't really understand how bringing in the Babylonians to bring death and destruction is going to be good for God's people. He doesn't comprehend that. But he's going to obey. He's going to trust simply because God said so. That's faith. So, by chapter 3, Habakkuk has changed. He's changed dramatically, right? He's no longer this kid screaming out, why? It's very different now by the time we reach chapter 3. Look at his final response to God right at the end, verses 16 through 19 of chapter 3. And you heard one of these verses already this morning. But he says, I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. Though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer and enables me to tread on the heights. Verse 16 there. Habakkuk is terrified. He's still scared of what's coming, right? Look at how verse 16 starts. He says, my heart is pounding. My heart is pounding within my chest. My lips are quivering. My legs are trembling. I am terrified at the Babylonians coming our way. It's going to be horrible. Absolutely horrible. But look at how 16 ends. He says, I am going to stand confidently, though, and trust my God. He says, I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. I will trust what God has said. He said, because I said so. That's enough for me. His questions still have not been answered, right? But he's choosing faith. He trusts God, so he'll patiently endure. He'll get through whatever life comes at him. You know, Habakkuk is already living and believing what Paul will write hundreds of years later. Romans 8:28. We know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. In other words, we know we can trust God, even when we can't see it. Our God, who can transform Jesus' cross, right? A symbol of torture into the greatest symbol of hope. Our God, who can transform death from an ending to a doorway to life. Our God, who can change the darkness of Good Friday into the bright light of resurrection morning. He can be trusted to work all things together for good for those who love him, even when we don't have the answers. Habakkuk, minor prophet, thousands of years ago. He's a lot like us, isn't he? You and I have plenty of reasons to ask God why. I'm guessing you have some pretty big why questions that you'd love to ask God. Probably isn't difficult to come up with one. Why do people we love suffer? Why did that person that I love dearly die way too young? Why, God? Why cancer? Why depression? Why Parkinson's? Why dementia? Why, God, our family relationships that are supposed to bring us great joy, why are they bringing us such pain? Why is it so hard? Why the broken marriage? Why the broken friendship? Why the broken hearts? I could go on. I might have hit one of yours. And you know what? It's more than okay. I think this is a lesson from the book of Habakkuk, too. It's more than okay to ask God why. Habakkuk does not get in trouble for going to God and saying, why? Why? I don't get it. God invites our lives. He invites us to be honest with him. Ask him your questions. And sometimes he might give you the answer. Sometimes he might just let you in on what he's doing. But often what you'll hear from him is, because I said so. Trust me. I can't explain it to you. Just trust me. Doesn't mean we don't hurt. It doesn't mean we don't cry. It doesn't mean we don't get angry. We experience all of those things. And that's okay. We should. But it does mean that through the pain, through the hurt, through the tears, we trust God's promises. We stand on those promises. We trust that our Father still loves us. We trust that he is still for us and not against us. We trust him enough that we will stand in faith because he has given us the final answer to all brokenness and all the injustice and all the hurt that we experience and that we see. And his final answer is a resurrected Jesus who one day in the end will make all things right again, will heal all hurts, will cast off death and disease, and will dry all our tears. Our answer is Jesus, our hope, our confidence, our victory. The reason we can trust God when he says, because I said so. Will you trust me? Would you pray with me?